clown show versus the Washington Mystics. We have Stephanie White going all in on the Kelsey Mitchell dribble, 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 dribble. Never pass the ball. Just shoot, 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 shoot. Kelsey Mitchell is about to stay rogue in this game today versus the Washington Mystics, where it looks like
that right there's no random shot in the dark. It is a raw, undeniable realization of a diehard fan who has watched this exact same breakdown play out all season long and already knows the brutal ending before it even starts. The writing is on the wall, the patterns are identical, and this predictable script is completely exhausting a fan base that saw this disaster coming from a mile away.
Stephanie White calls a hero ball and sits on the sideline like this. I don't like her making those threes. That is what Stephanie White does when Caitlin Clark is doing her thing. But Kelsey Mitchell can run around jacking up shots left and right, and it's not called hero ball. It's called keep letting them fly, Kelsey.
Tonight, the Indiana Fever march into Washington to lock horns with a reeling Mystic squad completely desperate to erase the memory of their most humiliating rock-bottom disaster of the entire season. There is zero room for error. The stakes are sky high, and the entire night boils down to one massive, undeniable ultimatum that will completely define the trajectory for both of these franchises moving forward.
They have what the Indiana Fever can't match, and that is size. We tried to tell GM Amber Cox that all offseason. Lynn Dunn called us complainers online and all of this stuff. Now, we are about to see the...
Is Caitlin Clark finally getting the unrestricted green light to dictate the tempo and weaponize this offense? Or is she destined to be completely frozen out yet again while a chaotic, turn-taking system takes over? This exact, maddening contradiction is precisely what pushes the Fever faithful past their breaking point every single night as they watch elite, generational talent get actively held back by a fundamentally broken system.
On the Mystics, and they have a head coach who just crashed out, and he not gonna be looking to lose again. He crashed out. This dude had to get escorted out by police. He not trying to lose again today. I'm gonna let you know that right now.
The second Caitlin Clark catches fire and starts hunting her shot, the entire offensive engine is suddenly slammed into reverse. The ball completely dies on perimeter, and she is inexplicably forced to put on the brakes and conform to a suffocating, rigid system. It is an absolute tactical disaster that actively punishes momentum, completely suffocating her elite rhythm just to satisfy a broken blueprint that clearly isn't working.
Indiana Fever to win this game is going to be getting Kelsey Mitchell under control and playing team basketball. You are not at LA Fitness. You are not at the YMCA. You are not at 24-hour fitness. Play legitimate professional.
Yet on the absolute flip side, you have Kelsey Mitchell, the elite weapon who dominated the stat sheet at over 20 points a night last season, possessing a permanent green light to bleed the shot clock dry and hijack possessions with heavily contested looks from anywhere on the hardwood. It is a massive, infuriating double standard where her high-volume isolation play is completely excused, while the generational point guard is forced to play under a microscope and second-guess every single aggressive instinct.
Needs to be heavily involved in the game. She needs the ball in her hands. When the ball is not in her hands, there needs to be actions and plays run to get her open. We can't go the whole fourth quarter with Caitlin Clark, not getting her first shot until 1 minute left in the fourth quarter. That is ridiculous. That makes no sense. That is malpractice. That is sabotage. And
they are forcing these two guards to swallow the exact same shot diet, yet holding them to completely contradictory standards on the floor. The clock is officially ticking, coach, and it is time to draw a line in the sand because playing this toxic double standard is actively sabotaging any realistic chance this franchise has of winning.
Up and play big. You had an absolute meltdown. Okay, you were getting $6 million. The last time Aaliyah Boston went against Shakira Austin and Kiki Area-Finn and Lauren Betts, they all outplayed her. Aaliyah Boston had 1 rebound in the entire first half versus this Washington Mystics.
Here's the brutal, unavoidable truth. They already hold the ultimate psychological hammer over the squad, and giving away that kind of mental edge is a death sentence in this league. Tonight's matchup violently exposes a terrifying flaw this fan base has been screaming about since day one of the offseason. A complete, desperate lack of front court size that leaves this roster utterly defenseless and physically overwhelmed inside.
the Indiana Fever. Sophie Cunningham, I'm watching you look off Caitlin Clark a little bit too much. Raven Johnson, you need to stop shooting so damn much. You couldn't shoot in high school. You couldn't shoot in college. Now all of a sudden you coming over here jacking up shots. Remember,
they walked right into Indiana and ground out a brutal, exhausting 104 to 102 overtime victory right there on the Fever's own home floor. General Manager Amber Cox and the rest of the front office heard these massive size concerns loudly and clearly all winter long. But the organizational response was essentially to brush off online critics like it wasn't a real issue. Well, guess what? Tonight, the bill for ignoring that glaring physical deficit is officially coming due, and it could cost this team everything.
Caitlin Clark, to everybody, have to stop fouling shooters non-stop. And part of the reason that you guys are fouling so much is because you're not helping each other enough on defense. Caitlin Clark picked up her 5th foul versus Brianna Stewart because Lexi Hall didn't take one step over to help and shut off the lane.
This is exactly the terrifying narrative that should scare the absolute life out of Indiana right now. The Mystics aren't just another opponent. They are a wounded, deeply embarrassed, and incredibly angry squad playing after a humiliating blowout loss to the Atlanta Dream. In that matchup, Washington's head coach completely lost his composure, picking up rapid-fire technical fouls and an automatic ejection for aggressively confronting the officials until security had to intervene on the floor. Now, sitting at a desperate record, that team is going to storm out of the locker room in front of their home crowd, vibrating with absolute rage. A dangerous, prideful opponent play with their backs against the wall is a lethal threat, and Indiana must dictate the tempo immediately to avoid a repeat of Saturday's agonizing 83-75 loss to the New York Liberty. In that frustrating matchup, Caitlin Clark was completely suffocated by a broken system, held at just 10 points on a dismal 4 of 14 shooting performance. When this offense devolves into chaotic isolation ball, while everyone else stands around and watches, this roster has absolutely zero margin for error. Indiana simply does not have the bench depth or the front court size to win professional basketball games, playing a completely stagnant 4-on-5 style of play. The ball absolutely has to move from side to side, and the overall shot selection must make logical basketball sense. You can still be an incredibly aggressive, high-octane offensive weapon without being completely allergic to throwing a simple pass to an open teammate. That isn't hero ball. It is just foundational, fundamental professional basketball, yet making those basic reads feels completely optional on this current roster. This brings us to the critical third issue. If the solution isn't just letting Clark fire away from the logo every possession, then this coaching staff must actually design a meaningful system for her to execute. The fan base's explosive frustration is totally justified because you do not take a generational talent putting up an elite, historic 24 points and a league-leading 9 assists per game, firmly planting her in the early MVP conversation, and hide her in the corner as a predictable decoy, running her off the same stagnant down screen 30 times a night until every defense in the league has it memorized. You must put the basketball directly in her hands to dictate the tempo, weaponize a high pick and roll, and create dynamic off-ball actions that yield clean, high percentage looks rather than forcing her to catch a tactical grenade with 4 ticking seconds left on the shot clock. When Clark touches a ball early and often within a fluid system, this team instantly transforms into a top 5 scoring juggernaut. But when she is treated as a complete afterthought until desperation sets in, the offense devolves into the exact absolute nightmare we just suffered through in New York.
And hey, like I said, man, each and every blunder that this staff has, we are one step closer to change of some sort, whether it's Caitlin Clark being moved or this entire front office being shown the door and being handed their pink.
The sheer talent on the floor is clearly not the problem here. It is a fundamental failure of how that elite talent is being utilized. Getting role players to accept their specific lane is certainly one crucial piece of this puzzle. But the matchup that will physically decide tonight's outcome is much bigger, and I mean that quite literally. This is the exact moment where Indiana's persistent size problem stops being an abstract theory and slams into a brutal reality. With Aaliyah Boston visibly banged up and fighting through a day-to-day injury designation, the Fever are forced into a desperate corner where they need her to be an absolute force of nature regardless of whether she's operating at 100% or heavily taped up. The sheer physical presence waiting for her in Washington is terrifying. They are rolling out Shakira Austin to lock down the middle, a rapidly developing sophomore force in Kiki Iriafen, and Lauren Betts, the massive 6'7" mountain of a rookie who completely alters the geometric math around the rim every single time she checks in their last frustrating meeting. Critics claim Boston completely vanished when it mattered most, and whether you think that entirely fair or not, the harsh reality underneath that critique completely holds up if she gets physically outworked and bullied on the glass again tonight. And if Indiana keeps carelessly handing a significantly longer team completely free second and third chances at the rim, the Fever could run a picture-perfect offense and still easily lose this entire game. Make absolutely no mistake, this war is won or brutally lost right down there in the trenches of the paint. That relentless, uncompromising commitment to getting defensive stops is precisely what separates a legitimate championship contender from a deeply flawed team that constantly beats itself. Every single role player stepping onto that hardwood needs to fully accept their lane and execute their assignment without deviation. Let me be perfectly clear. When an opposing defense intentionally leaves a shooter wide open on the perimeter, it isn't respect. It is a blatant, calculated dare where the enemy is explicitly telling you they would much rather risk your shot than let Caitlin Clark dissect them with her elite playmaking. The only correct response to that defensive disrespect is to step into the rhythm look with absolute confidence and knock it down, or swiftly swing the rock to the next open teammate, rather than desperately hunting your own individual offense and blatantly looking off the absolute best passer in the WNBA. Indiana's role players do not need to play outside themselves. They simply need to do their jobs by setting punishing screens, spacing cleanly to the corners, and punishing defenses for cheating off them. On a roster built to be this top-heavy with star power, the microscopic margin between a grit and grind victory and a heartbreaking loss boils entirely down to the discipline and execution of the players whose names aren't flashing on the marquee. That brings us directly to Indiana's massive discipline problem, which is easily the most fixable issue on this entire laundry list. Look no further than that frustrating New York loss. The Liberty didn't just beat Indiana on the scoreboard. They systematically marched to the charity stripe and practically buried the Fever by calmly sinking an astounding 26 of 28 free throws during the game's critical turning point. You absolutely cannot hand an elite basketball team 26 free gifts at the line and ever expect to survive. And the truly maddening reality on tape is seeing that the vast majority of those catastrophic whistleblows are coming from completely avoidable, undisciplined mistakes. These catastrophic whistles almost always stem from completely avoidable, systemic defensive breakdowns where a perimeter guard gets badly beaten off the dribble. The back line help defense fails to rotate in time, and the next defender in the rotation is forced to lunge awkwardly and commit a panic foul. Even Caitlin Clark found herself in serious, game-altering foul trouble during that New York matchup, openly admitting to the media that a couple of her whistles were incredibly undisciplined. Tonight, going up against a deeply wounded Mystic squad that will undoubtedly attack the paint relentlessly to get into the bonus early, the Fever absolutely must defend as 5 fully connected players on a string rather than 5 isolated islands. Careless foul trouble is exactly how you hand an aggressive opponent its confidence back on a silver platter. And what happens tonight is dramatically bigger than just one isolated game on the schedule. If you strip away the constant media circus, this entire situation boils down to a single overarching argument about true organizational accountability. The Indiana Fever currently possess the most exciting, transformative young player in the entire sport of basketball, but they are forcing her to operate within a rigid, outdated system that actively gets in her way. The tactical solutions are not an elusive mystery, aggressively rein in selfish shot hunting. Firmly place the basketball back into Clark's hands to dictate the tempo, actively build dynamic off-ball actions tailored specifically to her strengths, demand that Boston physically anchors the interior, and stop handing opponents free trips to the bonus line through undisciplined fouls. These 5 distinct execution points aren't complex or revolutionary concepts. They are the foundational basics of winning basketball. And when a roster that's loaded with sheer talent consistently drops games due to a total breakdown in fundamental execution, the fan base rightfully stops blaming the players and points their fingers directly at the bench. This has fueled the spiciest, most extreme narrative tearing across social media, claiming the structural crisis inevitably ends with either Caitlin Clark demanding a trade or the entire staff getting handed their pink slips. But let's be completely real. That nuclear take stretches miles past what any actual evidence supports, because Stephanie White is not some unproven hire to be universally targeted after a rough patch. Lest we forget, this is the exact same powerhouse head coach who just last season took a heavily depleted roster and incredibly dragged them all the way to a winner-take-all Game 5 in a grueling WNBA semifinals battle against the Las Vegas Aces. Meaning by every logical, realistic metric, her organizational backing remains completely ironclad. Everyone needs to take a deep breath because it is only early June, and with Clark fully healthy and executing some of the most brilliant high-level basketball of her young career, firing off a dramatic emotional reaction barely a month into a grueling season is a complete overreaction. Kelsey Mitchell is a deeply proven, highly respected 20-point scorer. In this league, rather than a selfish chucker, Aaliyah Boston is fighting through a very real, painful physical injury rather than a motivation deficit, and context absolutely matters when evaluating a brutal road stretch that came against heavily loaded title contenders like New York, Golden State, and Portland. Yet, tonight's matchup remains a terrifying trap game because a reeling Washington squad sitting at a dismal 4-5 record is walking onto its home floor completely humiliated after its head coach was forcefully ejected and escorted away by security on national television. This is a deeply emotional locker room with everything to prove against the most highly scrutinized player in the sport, meaning Indiana cannot afford to show up flat, leave Clark hidden as a stagnant afterthought, get physically bullied on the glass, or hand away over 20 free gifts at the charity stripe. If the Fever replicate those destructive mistakes tonight, the Mystics will absolutely capitalize on that desperation. And the deafening noise surrounding this coaching staff will hit a violent, aggressive crescendo by Tuesday morning. A dominant, convincing Fever victory begins with Caitlin Clark aggressively seizing the basketball early in the shot clock to forcefully dictate the offensive tempo, rather than passively waiting around until deep in the fourth quarter to finally catch a clean look at the basket. It demands a fully engaged, physically imposing Aaliyah Boston, aggressively anchoring the paint against opponents like Shakira Austin and Lauren Betts, controlling the interior pulled down massive, double-digit rebounds instead of quietly fading into the background. Crucially, it relies on essential role players like Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham confidently stepping up to punish defenses by knocking down open perimeter shots while playing highly disciplined, connected team defense that keeps the referee's whistle firmly out of the equation. If Indiana executes that blueprint, this game won't even be close because they are undeniably the more talented roster on paper. However, raw talent has never been the fundamental question defining this dramatic season. The true overarching narrative of this franchise over the next 4 grueling months isn't whether Caitlin Clark is a spectacular, historically great player, but whether the coaching staff and front office can construct a cohesive, functional system that allows her generational talent to consistently win big games rather than just frantically try and survive the schedule. Every single matchup where the offense predictably bogs down into isolation ball and Clark is relegated to a stationary off-ball decoy inevitably injects fresh fuel into the growing chorus of an intensely vocal fan base. Whether you view that unrelenting spotlight as entirely fair or fundamentally unreasonable, this crushing pressure is the baseline reality of possessing a truly generational talent capable of altering a franchise's entire trajectory. You either adapt and confront that massive challenge head-on or risk getting completely swallowed by it. My honest, unfiltered prediction is that tonight's battle will be significantly tighter and far more stressful than it appears on paper, and exactly how Stephanie White strategically deploys Caitlin Clark within the first 6 minutes of the opening quarter will dictate the entire script. If Clark immediately takes the wheel to initiate the offense and aggressively exploit gaps, Indiana will comfortably secure a statement win and temporarily silence the outside noise. However, if she is utilized as a passive decoy waiting around for structural permission to dominate, a fiercely motivated Washington team will claw their way into a hostile, loud rhythm on their home floor. That is why the choice falls directly on the viewers. Pick a side right now. Is this ongoing identity crisis completely on the coaching staff for systematically boxing in the most electric playmaker on earth? Or is that narrative a convenient excuse for a roster only a few weeks into a grueling season while navigating a severely banged-up frontcourt? Drop a comment right below telling me exactly who you've got walking away with a massive victory tonight, and more importantly, who you are actually holding accountable if the Fever somehow managed to drop this critical game. Is the blame strictly on the bench, Or does his roster need to look in the mirror? If you want this exact brand of raw, analytical, no-holds-barred tactical breakdown before every single Fever game, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and smash the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Tip-off is officially locked in for tonight in Washington. The stakes could not possibly be any higher, and I will see every single one of you right there in the live stream chat. Depending entirely on how this game is handled from the sidelines, there is absolutely zero guarantee I won't completely lose my mind and crash out before we even hit the halftime intermission.